Hello again. While I was falling around up mountains last week, I was prompted to think about the whole business of growing old. It is no secret that I find old people as a rule immensely tiresome, and I dodge them like lepers whenever possible. This is not because they are old as such, but more than most of them have chosen to become a certain type of personality with the passing of the years. 20 years ago, when he was in his late 50s, a male relative of mine who was an enthusiastic bird watcher and walker, a real outdoor type who loved going up mountains, said to me that he would not be able to keep going up mountains for very much longer. I asked why, fearing that he had perhaps been diagnosed with some medical problem, but he looked at me oddly and said, "Well, I'll be retiring in a few years." Sure enough, he stopped going on holidays in mountainous places, and by the time he did retire, he had adopted the persona of a person who walked slowly and steadily along the streets, as though in fear of stumbling or falling over. He had decided to become an old person. That was what he was going to do when he hit 65, and lo and behold, he did. He began dressing like an old person, talking like an old person, and behaving like an old person. This is chilling, but by no means unusual. Watch people in their 70s, and you'll see that many such of them have slowed down not because their bodies are wearing out or because they are ill, but rather because they feel that this is the appropriate way to walk, the right way of conducting themselves now that they are pensioners. They start plodding along instead of walking briskly like everybody else. I mean, yes, to be fair, they haven't really got anywhere to go. They're not in any particular hurry. So I suppose that causes them to start faltering in their walking more slowly. But even so, hand in hand with this physical process, their minds too seem to shut down, and instead of actually thinking about the world, they simply trot out the ideas which they formed 50 years earlier. I regard this as a hideous state of affairs. I'm very keen on Kipling's poetry and that of John Betjeman, but that doesn't mean that poetry ended with those men. Here's a book which I picked up the other day. Um, it's a collection of poetry called Cloud Corporation by an American, Timothy Donnelly, who's reckoned to be one of the greatest modern poets, and I'm working my way manfully through it. This is modern poetry, of course, and to be brutally frank, it might as well be written in a different language. Both the themes and the style are wholly unfamiliar to me. But it's a good exercise to try and get to grips with a poet like that, with a modern poet. I can't sit around reading Gunga Din and On the Road to Mandalay for the rest of my life. This is why I seek out young people, and would far rather talk to a person in his or her 20s than I would somebody of 70. I've had various young people contact me via this channel, be prompted by watching this channel, and I've met up with them, university types, and I find it very refreshing. Speak to a person of 70, and after a few exchanges, you can pretty well guess what they're going to think about most topics, from Brexit to veganism and immigration. But this is not at all the case with youngsters, who have a usually bubbling variety of different and sometimes fresh and surprising opinions. An awful lot of old people do not even seem to have learned all that much over the course of their lives about how the world works, and this is something I noticed quite recently. For example, one of the things from which I gain keen enjoyment is observing situations unfold in real life, the outcomes of which I already know well in advance. This is not because I am possessed of extrasensory perception, and nor am I clairvoyant, of course. This is, or it should be, one of the great benefits of growing old, that you know how things work. Yet it seems to me from the conversations that I do have with old people when I am reluctantly compelled to interact with them, that most of them haven't really observed the world and learned to do this. For example, when somebody prefaces what he tells me by saying, "I'm going to be absolutely honest with you," I know at once that I'm about to be told a lie. I learned this as a child in East London. Some villainous fellow would swear an extravagant oath as to the veracity of what he was saying by coming out with a phrase such as "on my kid's life," or "I swear but on my eyes." Anything like this, which asserts that the speaker is honest, is bound to precede deception. Even such a simple, and to me at least obvious thing, has passed by many old people, and when I mention it they look puzzled as though this is quite a new idea to them. Their lives have taught them nothing. Or again, when a couple have agreed to divorce, but it's all going to be done amicably and they will remain good friends and there'll be no bitterness or resentment after the separation. I know that within a month at the outside, the furious quarrelling about dividing up the property will have begun, and that almost without a shadow of a doubt, one of them will be engaging a lawyer. A lot of life that I watch is like this, in that I know ahead of time what's going to happen. It is to me like reading a familiar book or watching a film I've seen a dozen times. I say to myself, "Oh, I know what happens next," or "this is a good bit." In short, although some people slow down and become mentally impaired for medical reasons, the vast majority do not. They simply start to think of themselves as old people, and they have a mental template which they use to assume this persona. It includes moving more slowly and thinking less about things. It also often appears to me to include not acting upon the lessons which life should have taught them. Little wonder then that I am very happy to associate with young people, but I often make excuses if the possibility is mooted that I should meet up with somebody who is old.